With Screen Africa magazine, and we're reporting on the final day of Durban FilmMart, which stops today on the 20th of July, running alongside the Durban International Film Festival. Now, we're here with Ingrid Kopp, who's Director of Digital Initiatives at Tribeca Film Festival of New York, and you're kind of driving the Transmedia Lab that's happening here at Durban FilmMart. So why don't we start off by chatting a little bit about transmedia storytelling and what that means, what it's all about.
Sure. Well, actually, the first thing I should say is I've actually just recently changed into a new position. I'm actually now a full-time consultant for Tribeca because I've actually recently relocated to Cape Town.
What?
Yeah, so I'm still working for Tribeca, but I'm working remotely from South Africa and working a lot between South Africa and New York City. So
welcome aboard.
Thank you. So it's really great to be here. So I'm really excited to do a lot more work on transmedia here in South Africa. So that's the first thing I have to say, because it's totally relevant to this conversation.
Absolutely.
And then, it's been, this is my third year at DFM. And right from the beginning, I've been running masterclasses and labs around transmedia. And it's been really interesting sort of seeing the conversation evolve and seeing how I think people are really understanding that, with digital initiatives in South Africa and with mobile proliferation, there is a lot of opportunity to actually do things with transmedia, that it's not something that's just, in the United States or in Europe, and that people are really excited about exploring that here. So it's been really nice to see that over the past 3 years, and I'm excited to see what happens, going forward.
Transmedia storytelling, that's really about maximizing the potential of a particular story or film and branching out onto different platforms and telling it in new ways and kind of creating cultures and followings around it in as many ways as possible. Can you maybe chat to us a little bit about an international film that has really used that to its full potential and seen success from that?
Yeah. Well, so I think that, transmedia is a really broad term, and I think a lot of people will define it as, exactly what you were saying, this idea of a story world where the film will just be one part of it and you can get the backstory through a comic book or a TV series or a game or whatever it is. I actually have a slightly different definition where, for me, it's really just about pushing the boundaries of storytelling. It doesn't have to be across platforms. It could just be a web documentary or an app or a game. It could be virtual reality, for example, which is now getting really huge with the Oculus Rift. So I actually define interactivity. I think about it more in terms of interactivity and new relationships with the audience. That said, there are examples of the kind of transmedia you described. Pirates of the Caribbean would be a really good example of that. The Matrix trilogy, where there are all these different kinds of platforms for the story, and by looking at all those different platforms and delving into those different platforms, you can get the full story. So if you're a total fan, you can get the merchandise and you can read the comic book and you can play the game, and it just kind of goes on and on and on. And it becomes this idea of unraveling and unlocking a universe that you feel part of. And I think one of the other things that's really interesting about this new space is that the audience actually become participants as well. So you end up having a very different relationship with the audience, which allows for different kinds of stories to be told. And that, I think, is something that could be huge here in South Africa.
So, we're obviously not maybe where overseas markets are in really utilizing this technique. How big is that gap? Do you think we're really far behind? Do you think we can leapfrog and quickly catch up?
I think everyone is everyone is experimenting. No one's figured this out. This is something that I keep telling to people here, because they keep asking me as if we've figured it all out in the United States and the money's flowing and everyone knows what they're doing and it's like we've nailed it. It's not true. There are experiments happening in Canada. There are experiments happening in France. Canada and France, I think, probably put the most money into this space, so they have some of the best examples. Hollywood, obviously, with their big sort of franchises and transmedia projects, and then advertising and brands, because they're obviously always looking for eyeballs. So there's definitely best practices. There are definitely rock stars emerging in the space. But the one thing I would say is, one thing that South Africa and Africa in general is really always been good at is leapfrogging, right? And catching up and doing things a little bit differently with what's available here. So I don't think it's a case of not being ready. I think it's just a case of adapting it for a South African reality and for a South African market. And actually, I should probably even say South African markets, because I think the one thing I've learned here is that actually there are lots and lots of different kinds of audiences who all need different kinds of stories and will have different access to those stories, right? So not everyone has a smartphone, true, but a lot of people have radios. And transmedia can be told through radios. They can be told through comic books, printed comic books. We've just done a project in India called Priya's Shakti that we funded, and most of that's just analog comic books that are distributed for free. Dealing with gender-based violence in India. So the stuff doesn't have to be super digital either. It can be analog, it can be paper. So I think there's huge opportunity here. I don't think anyone's behind. Like, I think we're all just kind of experimenting in different places. I think what maybe is lacking here is a little bit of kind of like understanding of what's already happening elsewhere, and a sense that like everyone can do it. You just have to actually commit to experiment, which also means funding.
Let's talk a little bit about the lab here at DFM. Yeah. What kind of things are you going to be doing? What are your goals and things you would like to achieve with the lab?
Yeah. So we just did it was a 4-day lab, so we just finished it, and basically the way we did it is it was really to kind of give producers who'd never necessarily done any transmedia or even thought about it, or maybe were like, I don't actually really know what you're talking about, giving them a chance to kind of get a sense of what's been done, different definitions of transmedia, and then a sense of like how they could apply that to however it is they're already working. So day one was an overview of transmedia where we showed projects, both fiction and documentary. Most of the stuff I do is documentary, but obviously there's a lot of great fiction examples too.
Girl to my own heart.
So we, showing that it's possible in all these different genres. It doesn't matter. You can do horror transmedia, you could do, a drama, you can do documentary. It doesn't matter. It's just storytelling in different ways. And then, so day one was an overview, showing what people have done, showing what amazing organizations like the National Film Board of Canada have done, showing projects that we've funded through the TFI New Media Fund. And then in day two, we moved into this idea of like audience engagement and designing a project early on with sort of design thinking, so that you're thinking about the audience from day one rather than thinking about the audience once the project's produced and it's too late. So that was really, really key for me, actually. I think the one thing I've learned from doing this is the audience is always present, and often the audience is involved. They become producers as part of the project. So it's really important not to sort of patronize your audience. It's really important not to sort of not worry about them till the project's done. So that was day two. And then day three, we did a lot around distribution and marketing and social media, about how you identify where your audiences are. Are they on Snapchat? Are they on WhatsApp? Are they on Twitter? Are they on Facebook? Are they on Mixit? Wherever these communities are, you have to go fish where the fish are. And so, you don't want to spend ages promoting a project on Facebook when your audience are not really on Facebook, for example. So a lot of stuff around really thinking about that stuff and thinking strategically, which, sometimes for filmmakers and artists feels weird and feels a little bit kind of like unnatural and like marketing speak. And one of the things I was sort of trying to show is actually how this can become a very creative part of your process, and it actually can really feed you creatively. It doesn't have to be like this horrible other thing that you have to do. At the same time, if you are really uncomfortable, what you then need to do is build a team around you who do that, right? So you get the producers and the transmedia experts and the user experience designers, and then they can work with you so that you are protected to do what you do best. Totally possible. And then finally today, Mark Schwinger's joined us, who knows, I think, more about like the infrastructure of South Africa and everything than anyone I know. It's like
he blows my mind.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So he basically gave us like the nitty gritty, like what's going to happen with DSTV, fiber lines. I mean, like all the stuff that I knew nothing about. Like how many smartphones we have right now in South Africa, how many we're going to have in 2018, and his focus was really like, what's actually happening in South Africa and what do we need in terms of policy and infrastructure and funding to make this stuff happen. And that, I think that was a really kind of good addition, because it showed that actually, there are definitely issues, and there are definitely spaces where South Africa is behind in terms of, things like digital infrastructure. But again, going back to this idea of leapfrogging, there are so many amazing things you can do with a good cell network and a smartphone, even a feature phone. And so that's what I think he was showing that was really exciting, is that doesn't mean you can't do stuff. It just means you have to do stuff differently. And if you look at Kenya, I think Kenya are a really good example of like exactly that. They face the reality of like how things are in Kenya, and then they've got this unbelievable entrepreneurship and digital culture springing up there. Not saying like we're going to wait for 20 years until everything's fixed, but like we're going to look at things as they are now, and then we're going to do things like Ushahidi and Build the Brick and M-Pesa and all these other things. And I think that's the kind of entrepreneurial creative excitement that I'm excited about digging into here.
Absolutely. I think the potential for Africa is crazy, especially in the next couple of years. I think we're going to see booms in all different kinds of industries to do with content. So that's really exciting. Yeah. Ingrid, thank you so much for chatting to Screen Africa today. It's really nice to see that, we're giving Africans an opportunity to really get excited about these new technologies and these new methods of getting their stories out there. So thanks.
Thanks, it's a pleasure.
You're with Carly Barnes, Deputy Editor for Screen Africa. We're reporting on the last day of Durban FilmMart, which runs alongside the Durban International Film Festival, which is still carrying on all the way until the 26th of July. So stick around for that.